I'm Stefano Maffulli. I'm the Executive Director of the Open Source Initiative, the organization that defined open source software and has been maintaining that definition of open source for the past 25 years. And today we're going to be talking a little bit about open source AI. I don't know how many of you have been playing with machine learning, deep learning, other models in this space, right? All right. Cool, cool. So we're going to be talking a little bit about that. So let's get into this. So these systems, and I'm going to be using the term AI, machine learning in a very interchangeable way, in a very imprecise way, because I'm not really that deep into the technology. And I just want to, put them under a big umbrella. AI systems are being deployed at scale. They're already making decisions for us, and they're out of the research labs. They are affecting our daily life. And in fact, and sometimes in very new and surprising ways, and not always good ones. Like in this case, there was a story not too long ago on the New York Times, a father who was using telemedicine and was sending pictures of his children to his doctor, and Google systems, artificial intelligence, although there's nothing intelligent about this story, detected child nudity and automatically flagged the account. And for this father, a whole life of hell opened up. And in fact, the New York story should have been retitled like this: an automating tool gets it all wrong and creating havoc in the life of a person. Clearly, this system has a bug, and it's a very complex issue. Definitely, these tools have been designed and put into production without enough thinking, and clearly there is a problem inside Google. They need to review them because clearly this is broken. But let's think about it in a very abstract way. Let's remove Google out of the picture, suspending the judgment for a moment. I don't know what's happening inside of Google. What follows is just pretending a story. There was a meeting, and a big boss must have thought, we need to automate. We can automate this thing. We have built this wonderful machine that detects child nudity, so why don't we automate the system that detects the children and immediately flags the account and sends a notification automatically to the police. And this is going to be fantastic. We're going to save so much money. We're going to save so much time, right? Without any human supervision, because the robot is perfect. I love it. Like fiction, okay? But the corporation is developing and has deployed this very fast robot that is making a judgment call, and that is affecting the life of a citizen. So, as a society, how do we fix this bug? We notice that this is happening and it's being wrong. So how do we go? Let's think about when we started promoting open source software. There was this catchy slogan, given enough eyeballs, all bugs are shallow, right? I don't know how many times we've heard it. We can assume that software would be better if it's open source because we can look at the source code. We have communities capable of looking, interpreting, and fixing bugs, right? So if you're an astronomer, you found some piece of software that predicts an eclipse and gets it wrong, you can fix it yourself. You can hire a friend to fix it. In theory, this can be done. So in theory, we could do similar thing. Like, it's the AI, so let's go. Google, your child abuse detection system doesn't work well. Give me the source code, and we will fix it, right? But how do we do that? Too many pieces when it comes to machine learning systems are black boxes. They don't fall into the open source definition itself. The concept of source code is not well defined. Where does the data that trained the child nudity detection system comes from? And is that the input the only thing that you need in order to train your model and fix the model. These are basically black box systems. You can't, they spit out answers, but you don't necessarily see how they come to those conclusions. They're not very deterministic or predictable that way. And if we wanted to apply the open source principles to this case of this father with dealing with this problem, what should this father demand? You know, send me the source code of what? Or the police, you know, if they get so many of these bad tags, bad information, how should they go and ask for not making that mistake again to the robots? So we need to take a step back and start looking and understanding what's coming into this automated decision-making system. For example, think about in the past, if you wanted to make a collection of your pictures, you had this digital asset management. You threw your pictures in there, and then you had to manually add the tags, like this was taken in a certain date, or this is a picture of the trip that we took in the San Francisco Bay. There is no knowledge in Shotwell, this software, about what's included inside the picture. And if there is a bug into Shotwell, you know how it's fairly easy for any person trained into computer science to go and look at the list of dependencies and fix the various packages and libraries that give you the function of grouping your pictures by date, by location, by tags. But when it comes to the new digital asset management system like Google App Photos, they see what's inside the picture. They can recognize pasta from pizza, from sailing, cats and dogs, and I don't have to tag anything. And there is a magic box that does that recognition stuff. So let's have a look at this wonderful documentary called Silicon Valley. And this piece is really funny.
Hey, Zach.
Not hot dog?
Wait, what the fuck? Eh?
That's it? It only does hot dogs?
No, and a not hot dog. Give me that. Give it to me. Jin Yang, motherfuck. I gave you the ability to spin gold, and instead you spun pubic hair with shit in it and gravel and corn.
Hold on. Jin Yang's actually put together a pretty good classifier, you know? I mean, the core tech is valid, it just needs to be trained.
So what he did for hot dogs, he needs to repeat for every food in existence.
No, that's a very boring work. It's a scraping the internet for thousands of food pictures. You can hire someone else.
We can't, because Hey, Zach.
So this is, okay. So there are nuggets of very important pieces in here. So 2 important quotes. One, the core tech is valid, and it only needs to be fed a lot of pairs of images and labels to create the learning pattern. And then in order to work, this classifier needs a huge amount of those images and labels. And that's the other part that it's interesting. It's a very boring job, scraping the internet and patiently adding the labels. So who wants to do that, right? Who has the capacity to do that? It's very simple. Large corporations. They've been doing this for a long time. They had a very long head start, and they've been collecting data for a long time. For example, they harvest the data, like Google Spiders, for example, and Facebook, we even give them the data. Like we give them and we train their algorithms that way. But even before that, Flickr, for example, we uploaded a lot of pictures in the heydays because it provided us for a place to do it. And now that we have phones in our pockets, we snap pictures, we upload them constantly, and we give them out to these large corporations. So we do we provide the data, and we classify that. We put the labels on, too. So more or less, without trying to be very specific, very, very precise about this is what happens for an AI system. getting data and then passing through a classifier and then adding tags and all of that. And developers have, when something goes wrong though, people get to jail or they get denied a loan or other very horrible mistakes can happen and are already happening because of these systems. There is a tremendous responsibility in the hands of developers of machine learning because they can really create havoc. And governments around the world are starting to get nervous about this. They're starting to think about regulating the use of AI. So going back to the father, the police, the society, we need all these elements. In theory, we need to have access to all the data, the training algorithms, the weights, the models themselves, and the applications in order to begin to think about fixing a bug inside of an AI. And we also need to have access to the hardware to repeat whatever has generated that model. So is that all we need? Are all these elements the only things that we need in order to get to the source of an AI system? I'm not sure about how to answer this question, but we definitely have to have this conversation about, as a society, how do we protect our rights to access, our rights to inspect, our rights to trace the origin of all these decisions, and how we provide to the lawmakers, to the policymakers, a guardrail for them to respect our rights as a society. The same way that we've given with open source principles and the free software principles, a guardrail for having access to the digital means for our society. So these are the questions that we have asked ourselves as Open Source Initiative in 2022. We started thinking about how do we understand the systems before in order to be able to provide answers. And we have done a 3-part event interviewing people and starting to understand. And what we discovered is new things, like, for example, models themselves most likely don't have any copyright, don't fall under the law of copyright. And as I was investigating and talking to lawyers about the nature of this conclusion, is that we are pretty much at the same time when in the 70s, software started to be distributed as a new artifact. It was something that historically did not exist. Cavemen were making stone tools, but they were not writing software. In the 70s, we started to write software and distribute software autonomously, separated from the hardware. Doing that created a new legislation. We identified in the legislation there was a piece missing. There were books covered by copyright, but not software. And there was this long debate about whether software should have been covered by copyright or not. It was settled in a court case in the 80s. But until then, software was being copied, distributed without copyright protection at all. We're probably at the same time with these models are new artifacts. They are the elaboration of a training algorithm and built from large data sets. What's going on here? Traditionally, copyright law does not cover what's an elaboration of a machine. So at least in the US, we can probably say that there is no copyright. But nonetheless, if you go on a place like Hugging Face, which is this repository of large models, they are all considered to be covered by copyright and they're distributed with software licenses. But is that the right thing to do, or even is it a good thing to do? We don't know yet. The output of a model itself, this becomes even more fascinating because now you have trained data sets, building a model. The model is a machine itself, and the machine is creating new things, like this picture here. It's messed up. It's got 3 hands, 4 hands. I don't know what it's doing. The Mickey Mouse. Definitely, you can recognize Mickey Mouse, but this is the output of a machine. Is this covered by copyright or not? I think that there is already a court case being discussed, or we will soon know. Disney is notoriously litigious, and they will definitely stretch or test in court whether this theory is valid or not, or what happens, what's the regime under which the output of a machine is under. The other thing that is interesting to know is that the EU is regulating AI. They have a draft regulation called the AI Act, and it's now being discussed by all three organizations, the Commission, the Parliament, and the Council. They all have proposals, legislations, and they're negotiating what's happening in there. There are a few things that are very clear in this regulation. One is that European regulators don't want to see happen again in Europe that an algorithm is manipulating the perception of the people. They call it subliminal messages somehow, but they don't want to have subliminal messages. The AI Act prohibits clearly some usages. For example, they don't want to AI systems that exploits vulnerability of a specific group of people by their age or physical, mental disability, and they don't want to have AI systems that create psychological harm. They want to prohibit the use of real-time remote biometric identification systems in public spaces, except for the purpose of law enforcement. Or unless it's very strictly necessary, so there are provisions, of course. Then the Act defines high-risk AI systems that are those that get intended to go into things like automatic driver's car. In the AI Act, in the drafts, there is the intention to require constant assessments that these systems are actually working correctly. And they have put also other requirements for data management and transparency. They want these AI systems to be monitorable by humans. So they're trying to, they definitely see the problems, and they want to try to put some blockers in there. Is that enough? But I don't know, honestly, because from the open source perspective, as communities of open source, we would really like to have an answer to that. Like, we would really know, like, when other software systems or digital systems have been deployed, we always had the answer to say, hey, no, we need to be able to inspect, we need to be able to access to the source code, we need to be able to follow standard protocols and other answers. We have the knowledge, but we don't yet for these sort of questions. And then there is the problem with data sets. Some of these AI systems, machine learning systems, really require a huge amount of data. And it's not easy to gather a large enough pool of data to be meaningful to train AI systems. So when many of the open source or the more open data sets that exist out there, they've been scraped from the web, doing very large spidering and crawling efforts. And they've been, for example, Common Crawl and the Pile is 800 gigabytes of text. It's a huge amount of text. I thought when I started looking into these, I thought that the whole content of Wikipedia would be a massive amount of text, but that's only a few gigabytes. It's really nothing compared to the rest of it. So the Pile and others, they've been assembling these large things. And what happens, though, is that the web is really not a very good source of good data. It's extremely biased. It's very easy to get a lot of profanities in there. It's very Westerner influenced, if you want. So basically the best data sets, the most complete data sets that we have that are freely available for real are not good ones, or they come with a lot of problems themselves. One other issue that we need to be aware of is unleashing an AI in the public can create real problems, like the Google story, but also other stories. But also thinking about another set of tools that is quite popular, and it's open source. It's called deepfakes. Deepfakes can create the image or the voice and also animate that in a video of real people, but superimposed, overimposed over the actions of someone else. And so these are getting used a lot to create things like non-voluntary porn from using a porn movie, and you put the picture of someone else and you're creating, these tools can create trouble. And these tools, it's bizarre because they're released with an open source license, and the open source licenses, as you might know, don't prevent in the license themselves, don't prevent field of use restrictions. So it's generating some sort of conflict between the interest, and these AI systems are generating this conflict between the interests of the open source developers with the mindset of and the legal and social framework, the social norms of not restricting the usage, but then the ethicists and the damage that they can be done with these systems are kind of forcing the hand of introducing restrictions of use. And finally, we need to realize that building an AI models requires a lot of expensive hardware. And for this expensive hardware, there is not good open source software corresponding. At one point in the pipeline, for example, the leading systems are powered by NVIDIA. And NVIDIA is known for having proprietary drivers in our world, but when it comes to using the NVIDIA drivers to train machine models, we hit an even larger issue. There are newcomers like AMD, Intel. They're starting to appear and to put more fairly open, more open, but there's still a lot of catching up to do. And probably this problem of the open drivers might be the easiest to resolve, maybe. But there is also the problem of the knowledge to set up these large clusters that are capable of training in a meaningful time and without a meaningful investment, or without a very, very strong investment. These, I think, are the very big issues of AI. It's the data, the amount of data that is required, and finding that data, curating it, making sure that it has no bias. And this is the very basic way of using that raw data. Then the models themselves. What's inside that models? What's happening when, what's necessary to know that if the models have issues, how do we fix them? The other issue is the knowledge that is necessary to set up clusters that they can train or retrain given the same amount of input, retrain the models. And how these AI systems are being deployed. They have big promises and very disappointing results so far. If you think of self-driving cars, something that I just personally don't believe in at all, or the other big text generators that can create a lot of fake news or predictions that are wrong. It feels this field is really full of vendors selling magic potions. But there is also the problem of the social norms inside the AI communities. Those are not clear. There seems to be a consensus that it's acceptable behavior to scrape web for images and text data, for example, to publish papers and models that are, though, capable of doing harm. So there is a lot of more, there is more to be considered, but these I think are the biggest to starting the conversation. And I could stop here, but I think many of you will want to know about Copilot, what I think of it. And GitHub is one of the sponsors of OSI, but that doesn't prevent me from talking frankly about Copilot or about, I don't feel constrained, and I'm not constrained because I'm not. The thing about Copilot is that I don't care about it. The tool is a real distraction in my opinion, because the real issues are the ones that are already explained. Copilot will come and go like many other tools. It will be iterated and fixed upon. And most developers that I talk to don't think it's a good idea to use it even. Researchers and scientists don't want to have anything to do with it. So these are details, and they're very small compared to the bigger picture of AI. We're focusing as OSI on the bigger picture, not on the details. Some other organizations are more capable, and they're following that. We know how technologies require to think and carefully consider how we adapt to new reality. Software started to become a thing in the 80s. The researchers, the communities that were focusing around software, they developed their ethos, their social norms. They wanted to have software being shared. They wanted to keep on evolving the science of information technology and computer science, and they set the norms first. The MIT hackers group, they wanted to share their code. They didn't want the computers to have passwords. They wanted to have full access to the networks. They wanted to understand everything that they were doing, and they wanted to keep on doing that. And that's how they acted first. Then they wrote the manifesto, like, this is why we do it. This is our goal in the future. This is where we want this discipline to go. Computer science needs to go this way. Programmers need to have access. They need to be able to run, to study, to modify, to distribute the software. They need to be helping the neighbors. Then they wrote the licenses. And we are in a place now where the AI communities, they're not doing the same thing. They're thinking about the dangers of what they're creating. They're afraid, they're concerned. They're thinking about licenses immediately. And I think that we want to understand their principles. We are, as an OSI, we're reaching out to these practicing communities. We want to understand why they're taking these approaches, and we want them to have a meaningful conversation. We want to have conversations with them, and we want to help society also as a whole to understand these systems and prevent problems from happening. So I talked before about the analysis that we've done, the Deep Dive AI event. We summarized 6 podcast episodes and 4 panel discussions with 20 people involved of different parts from business to civil society, academia, and we summarized all of that in a report that you can download and read. But I also recommend you to listen to the podcast. They're very quick, 30 minutes episodes, more or less, with each one of them touches on a very specific point, from the technical issues of setting up clusters, an interview with Luther AI, co-founder, Debian developer, about what are the challenges with Debian by shipping models, a copyright lawyer, many experts in different fields. That will give you a very quick introduction to the challenges of AI. Now, for next steps this year, We think, we don't have it written down, but I can give you the preview. We will be holding a second part of these conversations, and we will be moving forward towards defining open source AI. We need to get into people into a room and have them understand, starting to create what we want to have in an open source AI and start writing down those principles. And with that, I think we can have the floor for questions. I'm sure you have plenty.
Awesome, thank you.
Thank you.
I feel like this track had the most interesting talks today.
Stefano, awesome talk, thank you. You gave a really powerful comparison to early software developers and how AI model developers are not pursuing the same systematic approach. Could you share a bit about why you think they're not pursuing that? Is it market-driven? Is it just this arms race to build AI models? Or why are they not pursuing that systemic approach?
Honestly, I don't know why. It's a very good question. What I have noticed is a lot of so AI is not a new thing, right? It's been prophetized, if you want. Like eventually there will be artificial intelligence for real, the artificial generic intelligence. But it's gone through cycles, right? They call them winters and summers of AI. And we are now in the longest summer of AI, I've been told, like the longest ever, right? Because every time the winters are shorter, the summers are longer, and they last, and they get better. The perfect storm has been described to me in this last summer is the amount of data that is available. There is a larger amount of data available than any other time before. There is competence that is more available, like the PyTorch, the TensorFlow, the tools that are available. And then third is the hardware. The availability of these three systems now is giving researchers and academia like a sort of a perfect storm to create these things. There is definitely a general perception of risk inside academia. Like the professors that I've spoken with, they all raise the alarm bells. Like they don't know what's inside those tools. They don't have tools or mathematical understanding of what's happening inside a model. They cannot predict them. They know that many models themselves, they're not static objects. They keep on changing based on the interaction that they have with the users. And therefore, lacking the inspectability, they cannot really guarantee that they actually work as predicted. They are afraid of the stop button, a self-learning system that tries to prevent itself from being shut down cannot be stopped at one point. So this is science fiction type of thing, but they know that if you unleash a system that is trying to maximize this was described to me in one of the podcast episodes. If you unleash on a system that is self-training to maximize your profit, and that system starts to operate for you in an open market, like you hook it to your large pool of money, and this system starts to work, then it might want to come outside of the finance system and start to say, sending fake news about, I don't know, U.S. attacking Albania, just because that is a signal that will trigger whatever short you have on the system itself. And if you want to shut it down, it may prevent itself from being shut down. And we enter into, but the stop button in mathematics, from what I understand, is an unsolved problem. So there is that big fear. And there is big investments that now need to be recouped. So, yeah, money talks. Rob, wait for the mic. We're recording the session.
I'm interested in hearing your thoughts about the jurisdictional component for this, where we have nation states that are more prone to have regulations and guidelines. We have free for all states like ours, and we actually have states that are using AI, I would say unethically, to coerce their citizens. And then but the technology is going to leak across those boundaries. Do you see that as, how do you see that playing out?
Yeah, it opens a whole new world of geopolitics. In fact, one of my suspicion, I'm not sure, but I'm suspect that the EU hurrying up to draft the AI Act now is exactly because I don't think that they have this huge AI industry. So instead of trying to slow down China and the other two powers with AI, China and the United States, they regulate everything and try to put boundaries and stoppers. But it's definitely a fascinating world. And we go back into why open source, why we need a definition for open source AI as soon as possible, is because with open source, we have created a huge global system that really does not stop at the borders. Although there are some exporting issues, but you remember at the beginning of the internet, we managed to remove a lot of friction from encryption, for example. And we used the open source principles doing that, or free software principles, and the free speech principles. They were all tied into one aspect. And we had an argument with regulators. That's what I'm trying to say. We had some sort of guidelines that we could provide. In this space, I don't think that we do, and I think we should be having them as soon as possible to help out and say, look, we need these inspectability, traceability, for example. What are the minimum viable boundaries, resources that in order to have a functioning system, but without blocking evolution and innovation.
Anyone else?
Got there.
Hi there. You're pushing for an ethical and lawful way of gathering data, as opposed to unethical and unlawful, like web scraping, for example. But between a company that gathers their data ethically and lawfully and a company that doesn't, there's no way that the company that does this lawfully by the book can keep up with a company that does it unethically. So from a business perspective, it doesn't seem to make sense for a company to go through all the proper procedures, making sure they have all the permission, right? So it doesn't seem to make sense. What's your comment on that?
Yeah, assembling the data and assembling a meaningful data set in order to be able to train something that actually works and is useful is one of the big problems. And and it's one of the first challenges that we need to solve, because probably it's one of the easy ones. We need to find the balance between the interests of the individual, the interests of the interests of the public. I give this as an example. I don't know if you're referring to the copyright the right to your face, for example, the right to the code that you have written, the poetry that you published, the blog posts that you published, the sound snippets that you have on a podcast. All those things. On one hand, if we start using copyright to say that's my style, or privacy laws to say that's my face, that's my blog post, that's my poetry, you cannot put it into a data set, we're basically abdicating as a society the possibility to aggregate large data sets in a public space, because Google will be able to do it, because and Facebook, Google, Facebook, GitHub, Microsoft, they will be able to create those data sets because they use the terms of service as the key to unchain access to your data. But we're removing from the commons the possibility to create meaningful data sets. But at the same time, by enabling this creation of data sets, we're giving up some of our control. We're giving up some of our faces. But maybe there is a middle ground, right? Maybe we can say, from the privacy perspective, you know what? Nobody can access my face. And it's probably where the European Union is going. Nobody can access anybody's face, and even Google and Microsoft, and they have that data, they have to give it up. Although there will be resistance from the law enforcement perspective for this specific use case. But in any case, but there will be, there's got to be a middle ground. The fact that parts of the community are opposing, they're trying to use copyright to prevent GitHub from using or OpenAI to build a chatbot, ChatGPT or Copilot is a double-edged sword. That means that we will not be able to create an alternative to Copilot that is completely free as we intended as a community, as an open source community. So we have to keep that in mind. I don't know if that answers your question or generates more.
My question was, as you said, AI without a stop button, it can be a very powerful arsenal of weapons, right?
Yeah.
It can direct, misdirect, and lead a country or the global, the whole world into a direction that you really don't want to go into,
Yeah.
with truth or otherwise. Is there a thought of having something like a global governing body to govern, like the UN, for example?
Mm-hmm.
You prevent wars, right? Is there an idea a thought to form a global body to govern or to regulate the advancement of AI?
I'm not aware, and I'm not sure that the role would be of organizations like the Open Source Initiative or other organizations in the space of here. Like this is especially for when we talk about weapons and arms. Definitely, there is I said that, like, every researcher I spoke to, they're freaking out. They know that these can be very dangerous things. There is a book that's been recently published about weapons powered by AI. There is a gazillion of them making decisions on the field, like right now, even in Russia, in Ukraine, following that war. These systems, they need to be regulated. AI, the AI Act in Europe clearly uses that approach, the approach of saying there are some usage that are going to be just prohibited, like cannot be done, like brainwashing and what's the other word? Subliminal messages, those are prohibited, right? Weapons, the other things are, then they use a classification of risk. Some high risk, low risk, middle risk, low risk. For example, there is absolutely no risk in the Netflix system that tells you which show you might be liking. Who cares? That screws up all the time. There's no way of getting good suggestions from Netflix. But there's no harm in there. But the higher risk thing, like a self-driving car, or the systems that regulate traffic automatically and turn on and off stop signs or traffic lights, those are a lot more higher risk, and they need to be controlled much better. There needs to be tool, and it's pioneering research to develop the tools that check that the model that has been trained on to manipulate traffic is actually doing the thing that it's supposed to do, and it's not been manipulated with from the outside. So nobody has injected bad data in order to get the outcome at this precise time, in order to create havoc in a city, for example, and enable an attack from the outside. One of the episodes with the DARPA, the defense agency, talks about the research that they're doing on that front. So, we with open source, with software, we had it easy. There is source code, you build it, and you get a binary, and you can match the binary to the source. You can get the full and corresponding source code, and we actually codify that into a license text, and you can rebuild and redo it cheaply or fairly easily if you're skilled in the art. We're at a very, very early stage with these systems that they are already in the hands of users.
Just to follow on the last question, because I've been reading and looking into this too. I know that there's, like you said, there's no chance for like a global body to really, make any sort of decisions on AI because there'd be no way to enforce it. But I know that one thing that is continuing to happen and has been happening for the past couple of years is that there are more countries that, as I don't know what the right way to say it is, but a lot of countries are now like deciding like their national strategy for AI. So, I mean, depending on like where you're from, like maybe that's one place, one avenue, being able to reach out to policymakers on like what the specific region or country AI strategy is. But going to an actual question, I guess like is the open source initiative, is that something that, is there like an opportunity there for open source initiative to kind of do like a survey? I know there's already been a lot of, there's some growing work on this, but to do like a survey, see what national strategies around the world are and see like, hey, maybe there's a way to kind of help countries that don't have one already, because, I can, there are definitely a lot that don't have one. Sorry.
Absolutely. So, so we have a program, a policy program that is now managed or staffed with 2 people, one in the US and one in Europe. And what they're doing is look at policy in a very wide sense, coming from Brussels and DC, that affect open source. They're not focusing on AI specifically, but in a wider sense. It's one of the mandates of open source initiative. Like one of the things that we do is to monitor legislation as it's being formed, discussed, or put into production, enforcement, and educate the general public about the effects of this regulation, educate the communities, the businesses, and how that affects, but also help use that as an opportunity to engage with regulators themselves and teach them about the effects of the laws that they have already, as they're being discussed. It's not specific to AI, but we do have a program and we monitor all of that. And we partner with organizations that have more experience in AI specifically. Like in Europe, we work a lot with Open Forum Europe. We work a lot with the Digital Commons and other organizations that have a specific analysts and policy experts that read those policies. I think.
Is the song already? It is. I was wondering about, like, when it comes to filtering like the input data to these large models and even the output data, which is what most people seem to think is easier, how that will negatively affect the ability for them to actually produce results that we find acceptable or good. Because I've seen a lot with even models like ChatGPT, which should be an extremely powerful large language model. It has like 150 billion parameters or something. Its outputs are reduced in quality severely by the filters that OpenAI have in place. So I'm wondering if we do put these restrictions on their input and output data, will that negatively affect these countries that are willing to subscribe to these AI ethics regimes versus where other ones, say, I don't know, China or another country that has the technological base to actually, run these models and develop them? Would they be at basically a stronger head start than other countries?
There is a lot of to unfold into that question, because on one hand there is the how do we build data sets that are meaningful and are fair, they're respectful of the various privacy laws, the rights of the authors, of the creators, and how do we, and on the other side of after the building, how do we make sure that whatever comes out of this system is not offensive or is not creating new troubles and new systems, new challenges. I don't think that there is one professor, one of the most advanced experts that will tell you, oh no, this, can be easily solved. This is, we know how to fix it. I don't think we have the parameters for that. And my impression after the first year of studying this, and I'm going to say on record, is that this thing got out of the labs way too soon. There is very little, so there's mathematical understanding of some things, but some other things are completely opaque. They don't have ways of fixing or knowing or understanding. There are very few professors, that have, that are capable, for example, there is a research that shows that you can actually modify the model itself without the training data set and tweak its internals for the internal steps to tweak in order to get, for example, a model that's been trained to recognize that the Eiffel Tower is in Paris, actually tweak the results so that it consistently says that the Eiffel Tower is in Rome. But it's not something that you download the software and you modify that. It's something that is advanced mathematics, and it's very, very, very complicated to do. It's very early. It's very early. It's very early. And on the other side of the spectrum, I mean, some people have been talking about artificial autonomous drivers, which is absolutely insane. And in fact, is taken to court.
All right. Awesome. Thank you so much.
Thank you.